have been a part of a nation that is torn apart by division. What are some of your reflections about what's going on in the United States these days?
I'll start with the easy question there, Joel, that you've asked me. I host a number of delegations from the United States of both independents, Republicans, and Democrats who want to have what we would term in our context uncomfortable conversations. The theologian Jonathan Sacks once said, "Weapons win wars, but ideas win peace." So trying to move people outside this zone, which is difficult at the moment, I don't need to remind you of that, to have those conversations. I often quote the New York Times journalist Bret Stephens, who says, in order to disagree well, you need to understand well. And really, Joel, it's just for you. I'm not asking people to transfer from a Republican or a Democrat to be a Republican any more than my good friend and colleague Bertie, who grew up in the nationalist tradition and I grew up in the unionist tradition. We're not trying to change each other's viewpoint, but we want to understand what has shaped us as human beings and ensure, most of all, after 30 years, as my good friend Paul Nolan says back home, the chairperson of the Good Friday Agreement in our context, says that we were on a hamster wheel to hell for 30 years. We work to ensure we never go back to political violence.
Hamster wheel to hell. What a great phrase.
I think for us, I saw your pledge where it's people, not politics. My first slogan when I ran for Prime Minister the first time was people before politics. And I think it's very much, I think our experience is that it's to try to get to the inside of the hearts and minds of people, as the great John Hume used to say, to try and see if there's ways we could deal with our conflict that wasn't bombing, shooting, murdering every single day of the year. It wasn't a day of the year where we didn't lose people. And I think the big thing that we've learned from our 30 years is that there is a way of being able to differ, see what the bigger picture is, see if there's a life after shooting each other and killing your neighbour, which is what we did in Northern Ireland and in parts of all over Ireland for many decades. So I think the success of what we did, Joel, was insofar is a success. Nothing is ever perfect, but insofar as it stops the killing, is to treat everyone equally, to treat everyone fair, to treat everyone with respect, that one community are not isolated in some way, that they don't feel besieged. And if everything is equal, then you can, of course, people have different jobs, different livelihoods, but if the circumstances, if the institutional positions treat people equally, then you remove a lot of the causes of conflict. And in our case, I think probably all of the causes of conflict.
You mentioned the word neighborhood. This part of the theme of the Good Friday Agreement is that, and it's world famous, but it was recognized on a national level how important it was for Northern Ireland, but it was literally a neighborhood community conflict. You mentioned last night the geography separating the two warring neighborhoods was like 100 yards. And so what principles can we bring, not just to our country, but to our community? What are some of the transferable principles that we can use in Central Florida to build peace and respect? I mean, how did you build the trust? How did you, there was a basic religious difference here, religious disagreement, as well as a traditional disagreement among communities and so on and so forth. Can you give us some of the components of what were important for you to arrive at a place of peace?
Well, I think both Gary and I are from different traditions, different religions, but I think some of the things that understanding the other side, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, not lecturing to them or trying to dictate them or shout them down. We did that very successfully for years, by the way. But when we stopped doing it, I think if you put yourself in the other person's shoes and see what their difficulties are, what they're trying to carry in their community, you see things in a very different light. And then that's understanding, I think, respect, dignity, tolerance, being able to listen. In our case, for years, we didn't listen. No side would be in the same studio. We went through 25 years where the different fractions, whether they were nationalists, Republican, Unionist, Loyalists, would sit in the same studio and debate. They would lecture each other from outside. And so the process, I'd like to tell you it's easy, by the way, it's not. But the process is to get people together, try and find something, some small thing that they can agree on and unite on and build on that. And of course, our whole basis of agreement was nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But bit by bit, line by line, respect and dignity, understanding, understanding religious difference. And I think that's what we managed to do. And it took a long time. I'd love to say it was a quick fix, but I think they're the same things everywhere. Both of us have been involved in conflicts in many places over the last 20 years. And I think they're the same ingredients that can pull people together. As long as we're talking, listening, trying to understand, not agree. We don't agree much in Ireland, as you know. But it's. I think if you work at that, it can make an enormous difference. They're simple things, but simple principles, but it does work.
Yeah. Jerry, let me specifically ask you to speak to the religious differences. You're a reverend. You have worked with in other parts of the world, and religious conflict seems to be some of the most passionate and some of the most destructive. How do you approach resolving that realm of the division?
Yeah. I think one of the key things for many religious leaders in this room is to have the integrity and the honesty to call it out when religion gets it wrong. And religion often gets it wrong. I don't need to even remind this audience of the legacy of slavery that many of us know in this room had deep theological principles propping up the legacy of slavery. The brilliant Jewish theologian Jonathan Sacks, who I had the privilege to meet in London before his untimely death in his early 70s a few years ago, says, we need to be honest that religion has done harm. People have killed in the name of the God of life, practiced cruelty in the name of the God of compassion, waged war in the name of the God of peace. I mean, religion has contributed to pogroms, jihads, inquisitions. Joel, ours was never a religious conflict in the sense that we're fighting over Protestant Reformation or Catholic Counter-Reformation. But those three components of land, identity, and religion were really prevalent within our space. And the question that one theologian asked, particularly of our three Abrahamic traditions, does the God of Abraham want his disciples to kill each other? And that's a question we all need to ask ourselves as religious leaders. I want to suggest to you the answer is categorically no. Because even when we return back to Belfast, my wife Joyce and I, we fly home from Orlando this Monday. On Tuesday evening, we will arrive in Belfast. But on Friday evening, we are having dinner with a friend of mine whose wedding I did in the late 1980s. He lost his wife at 29 and his father-in-law in a bombing in Belfast. So even 27 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we are still dealing with the aftermath and the legacy. And that's why I say to both Republicans, Democrats, independents, and faith leaders in this room, in a typical Irish sentence, you need to bust your gut to make sure you never, never, never spill into political violence. We're living with a legacy of that. Our kids are living with a legacy. 1 in 5 ex-prisoners drinking themselves to death. We have the highest dosage of antidepressants in Western Europe and one of the highest in the world. That should motivate people in this room. leaders, faith leaders, business leaders, to make sure that that dialogue, while you disagree, never spills into physical violence.
One of the things, yeah. One of the things we tend to focus on is the problem of disagreement. Let's switch over to the more positive. Give us some components that not only make for the absence of conflict, but make for ongoing dialogue and friendship. And I mean, you two would have been enemies a long time ago, you know. And I've seen you be very friendly toward one another. How do you change the culture from one of a zero-sum game? You know, somebody has to win, somebody has to lose, to a place of shared power, shared appreciation. Life is better because now I not only don't have an enemy, I've got a friend. How do you do that?
Well, I think the Good Friday Agreement is based on a bit for everybody. All sides, I could see that they achieved certain things in the agreement. They would argue that there were other things they should have achieved. But I think in any agreement or any society, there has to be an understanding that we're not left out. And if you're included and not excluded, if you feel part of it, then you have ownership of it. If you have ownership of it, you'll stand up for it. If you haven't, you'll fight against it. So I think what we managed to do slowly, and I keep emphasizing that slowly, was that we began to trust each other. We began to understand each other. We began to be able to have dialogue. We meet regularly with groups of people who were involved in violence, people who murdered people, you know, people who are community people. And slowly you're trying to move them all the time onto the next phase where they can move around and feel that there's dignity in the other side. And that wasn't there. I mean, people went out and killed just because you were Catholic or Protestant, but more so because you were in one area and lived in another area. So I think the secret in all of this, in so far as there is a secret, is being prepared to go out and hold the hand of friendship. Be prepared to show respect, and to treat people with equality and dignity. And that's how you win them over. You won't win them over by saying, we have a new policy document that says A, B, and C, or our new political ad is this, that, or the other. It is done at community level. It's done down on the street level. And that's, I think, where the difference is. And particularly women's groups, we found in Northern Ireland, women's groups have been hugely successful and maybe better than men in bringing people forward and getting people to exchange views. But it's slow work. It's painstaking work. But believe me, whether it's violence or difference, be prepared to listen and learn and understand and show respect and help people. It can change the environment totally. And while we haven't, I think, got to the end game yet, because that process isn't an event, it goes on and on. I think it can work, and it can work in any society. We've been involved in different places, different conflicts, and the same ingredients really can make a huge difference.
Kerry, what would you add to that?
Yeah, Joe, let me continue the gender theme with a quotation from the French philosopher Paul Valéry, who says, war is a place where young men who don't know each other and don't hate each other kill each other, encouraged by older men who hate each other, know each other, and don't kill each other. So I want to say that women need to be at the table. Research, academic research shows... Academic research shows categorically, and Bertie's just alluded to that, we ended up with a women's party to tone down the macho men of violence. A women's party was elected to our assembly, as we know only too well. But research shows that where women are at the table, there is a much higher percentage of a peace process holding. Now, that may be something to do with us alpha males or whatever. We can discuss that later. But women crucially need to be at the table. That is crucial. And that's a really important component that we learned in our context.
So let me go a little bit further with that. I heard the former Prime Minister say last night, there are still way too many old men who have been in power a long time making decisions for everybody. Let's, as one of those old men, let's talk about the importance, because we got a segment coming up with our students here. Let's talk about the importance of the next generation and how you have integrated them into this peace process.
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I wasn't, by the way, hitting at any particular old man. I was just saying, generally across the world, we have far too many. But the big problem is we have people who've been there for 30, 40 years. You look at the African conflicts, people there for half a century, and they're the leaders, and they won't move, they won't share, they won't do it. And this is a big problem. But I think what we're absolutely convinced of, we brought 10 different groupings together in the Good Friday Agreement, 10 totally separate groupings, including the women. And we had to try and make that as inclusive a process as possible, comprehensive as possible, but it was still 10 different groups who had some involved in violence, some not involved in violence, some half in, half out. So there were 10 different political groupings. I think a lot of the leaders that we worked with are dead. And the problem is, how do you replace them? We're now dealing with people who are talking about the legacy. They're talking about what happened when their grandfather was shot years before they were born. Now, we have to deal with that issue, and it's still a difficult issue for us. We're currently working on that. But what worries me all over the place is that the preparation for the next generation of young leaders is not moving quick enough. And talk about our context, I talk about in most of the other areas we're involved in. And this is a real challenge, and I'm an enormous believer, Joel, in exchange programs, in trying to take young people who are gaining the experience. They don't have to be 21, they can be 31, but 41, but they're young people who are coming through a different system. And if we don't put the effort into them, there is the danger that some of the old ways will come back again, that they look at the videos or they'll read the books about the glory days of violence. So I think the investment that our generation have to do while we're still around, and thankfully still around, that we have to transfer what we did and working with people to get out of the mess we were in and transfer the right traditions to them, that they can bring it forward. And that won't happen because young people, can turn off politics. They'll say, oh, sure, how do you get into that? It's impossible, it's too expensive. How do you raise the money, blah, 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 blah. But I think it is a huge necessity for us, whether it's at whatever level, not just politics, but whatever level, to get young people involved. And we're passionate about that. And if we don't do it, I think we'd be very sorry.
Jerry?
Yeah, one of the primary reasons I'm in the United States at the moment, and I need to contextualize that, I was having coffee with a senior British official in London in 2019. He's a little bit older than me, but maybe not that much older, and teasingly said to me, Gary, the pair of us are getting that little bit older. What are you doing for the next generation? And in 2019, in our Northern Irish context, we set up an emerging young leaders group, which has been going really well the last 7 years. I work also pretty extensively in the Israeli-Palestinian theatre. And an organization there has also set up an emerging young leaders group of Israelis and Palestinians. I've had 1,200 Israelis and Palestinians in Belfast and Dublin, along with Bertie, in the last 10 years. And they're from all shades of opinion. They're not just on the right, they're not just on the left. They come together and have those uncomfortable conversations out of that very, very difficult regional space. But it doesn't stop there, because in the last 2 weeks in Georgia and in Florida, you guys have launched two emerging young leaders group. My wife Joyce and I were at the Carter Center in early January when they sailed that ship out into the ocean. This week, we've been with our good colleagues at Global Perspectives and International Initiatives at the University of Central Florida, and they launched their ship in the last couple of days. It's a model that a number of people are now looking at. I read something yesterday with my wife, a name you will probably not know, Rowan Atkinson, who's a kind of comedian, nicknamed Mr. Fame. Here is what he said. Legacy is not what you earn, but what you give. Not brilliant. Legacy is not what you earn, but what you give. And that's so crucial because I know on my deathbed, I most certainly will not be thinking about what I earned, but I'll be thinking about what I've given to humanity. Because I believe, as a person of faith, God's imprint is in every single person's forehead in this room and wider afield. Don't forget that.
Thank you for your leadership and your courage and for sharing your very long journeys to this moment and for being an example for us all. Would you thank our guests?